What's going on, everybody? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and with the announcements and everything coming out of EVO last night, granted I'm not a fighting game guy myself, with the exception of old school Street Fighter, maybe a little bit of old school Mortal Kombat and old school Killer Instinct, but that's beside the point. I don't watch EVO or anything, but I hear about the announcements and I know a lot about what's coming out of there, announcement-wise and important information-wise. So one of the big things announced last night was that Tekken 7 is going to be getting an updated second season pass with a bunch of new characters that of course are not included in the first season pass. And this kind of begs the question, and this is something that we've seen in, as a trend most likely is the best way of describing it, in games over the last maybe 5 years or so, especially ever since this generation of consoles started, the Xbox One and PS4, and well, let's kind of disregard the Wii U completely. But when you look at those consoles, granted, there may have been one or two examples of this in the 360 or PS3 era. I'm not familiar with any games off the top of my head that had this kind of situation, but let's look at it anyway. When it comes to certain games in certain genres, more predominantly fighting games, but there are a couple of others that have this as well, but we're really going to look at it as the fighting game side of it. And that begs the question, are second, third, fourth season passes the new sequel? Now what I mean by that is, instead of releasing a new updated version of the game maybe every year or every second year that might have one or two extra characters in it, maybe some balance changes and whatnot, very similar to what Capcom is absolutely known and kind of hated for. But now with how gaming has changed and how the landscape has changed and how easily things can be patched and changed with digital distribution and free updates and whatnot, it begs the question, is this not only a viable but potentially a better alternative than all the old school style ones? Let me give you a bit of a frame of reference. Back in the day when Street Fighter 2 launched, there were multiple different versions of just Street Fighter 2. You had Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior, which is the base version of the game. You had Street Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers, Super Street Fighter 2, and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And over the first couple of those games, say just Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition, basically all you had was the ability to pick 4 new characters and some slight balance changes here and there. Which was very, very annoying, because you would essentially have to buy a full price new game just for these either maybe new characters or slight upgrades or slight changes in balance. I realized that some of the later games like Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo or just Super Street Fighter had new characters as well as entire move lists and balance changes and whatnot, but the principle remains overall the same, paying full price for a slightly upgraded version of your game. And this was something that Capcom did all the way through, all the way to even during the Xbox 360 era with Street Fighter 4. You had Street Fighter 4, Super Street Fighter 4, and Ultra Street Fighter 4. There's probably more that I can't even remember because I wasn't really into Street Fighter 4. But now with the likes of, say, Tekken 7, as well as Street Fighter 5 getting multiple season passes, granted this is something that usually I would speak out against, but last night it actually made me think. I was like, wait a second, this might actually be a viable alternative and possibly even preferable. Granted, I'm not into fighting games in the modern era, so that's why I wanted to make a video about it, to get feedback from you guys that actually are into modern fighting games. So with something like this, usually what they can do is they can keep the one base game, base mechanics, base balance, base everything, base characters, all that good stuff, and they can add to it over time. They can have a season pass, maybe every 6 or 8 months, or maybe even 12 months, maybe once a year, whatever it is. Naturally, the balance changes would generally come in with free updates, but you'd have extra stuff like new characters and whatnot adding to the roster every 6, 8, 12 months. Naturally, this would also be cheaper than buying a brand new full game. And a couple of balance changes aside, it allows you to have the same fundamental game to progress with, even when they add in all these new characters and updates and whatever, as it goes through several 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 8-year cycle until the next game comes out. Now, there's some positives and some negatives with this regardless. For example, if you do or don't like the mechanics of a game, they could potentially change. They could go from something you love to something you hate, and then you're stuck with those for a few more years, or they could go from something you hate to something you love, and they could be stuck with those for a few more years. So it works on both the positive and negative side of it. In fact, I can speak on one of those, despite not being massively into modern fighting games. I did play a little bit of Killer Instinct on the Xbox One when it first launched. It was enjoyable enough, I got pretty good with Shadow Jago, but then when some of the new seasons came in, they completely changed some of the movesets, the combos, the linkers, everything, and it essentially felt like an entirely different game, and that I did not like, which completely turned me off it. So you can see why it kind of works in a negative light. The only other thing you have to be very wary about in this whole, let's call it, single game as a service almost over the course of a few years with multiple season passes. And of course, I'm not talking about other types of games like Fortnite and Final Fantasy 15, which obviously have multiple seasons and season passes, or whatever they call them these days. But we always have to be very wary about this, because this is a slippery slope to games as a service. Granted, having one game you love be relevant and constantly updated for maybe 4 or 5 years, even if it does cost you maybe, I don't know, 25, 30 euro extra every year to get new stuff, that really doesn't sound too bad, does it? It's a game you love, it's constantly relevant, you constantly have a reason to keep playing it, keep it fresh, and keep going back to it. But at the same time, like I said, this could potentially lead to games as a service, which we all know I am very much against. This would be akin to what EA have talked about potentially wanting to do with FIFA, where you wouldn't buy FIFA as a game per se. You wouldn't download it onto your Xbox One, PS4, PC. You wouldn't put the disc in, anything like that. What you would do is basically subscribe to, let's call it the FIFA service, pay a subscription every month just to be able to play it. Of course, yes, at that point you would download it, but you wouldn't have a single one-off purchase. And that way, they could cycle it every couple of years. That basically, as long as you stay subscribed, obviously you still have access to play the game. And instead of coming out with a brand new iteration every year, as long as you're subscribed, that version of the game constantly gets updated. There are of course big negatives to this as well, because overall it would probably cost you more money in the long run. And of course, once you stop subscribing, you lose complete access to the game in every way, shape and form. And I'm a big guy when it comes to ownership. Don't like these companies having control of all this crap. Not to mention, when it ties in with ownership, they can basically just shut off the servers and stop the service as a game whenever they want and wherever they want, for whatever reason they want. Again, not a big fan of giving companies all these control over my time, my money, and my enjoyment. So that's where I pose this question to you guys, the fighting game guys. It also works to everyone else as well, but it's especially relevant to anyone who plays fighting games, I won't say competitively, but seriously as one of their top favorite genres. Even if it's not their number one, but something up there, maybe in their top 3 favorite genres or top 5. How do you guys feel about multiple season passes over several years to prolong the lifespan of your game, to keep the base fundamental game there, even if the balance changes do change it ever so slightly, with free updates and whatnot, and of course the potential for change, new movesets, stuff to be added, stuff to be removed, all that, but to keep the base core fundamental of the game the same, fresh, relevant for several, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is years, instead of you buying a new version of the game just to get 4 extra characters for full price. Which is preferable to you? Let me know all that good stuff in the comment section below. Hit the appropriate button to let me know what I did on the video. While you're at it, go on over and hit that subscribe button and even turn on the little notification bell. Granted, it's 2018, so getting an actual notification from YouTube about a live stream or video upload is a whole other story, but hey, at least I can say you tried, right? Anyway, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.